Hey, so last Friday when we did some Instagram stories, one of the topics to talk about in a fairly vague way was rate of force development. So I gathered some ideas and actually rewatched the one of the videos of one of the talks that I referenced in that recent continuing education post. And that talk was from Keith Barr. So in talking about rate of force development, it's by and large, I believe, to be very strong, very accurate that for a given group of individuals that are fairly homogeneous, they're fairly much the same, the individuals with higher rate of force development are going to outperform the many of the individuals that have higher maximal force production, maximal strength, but lower rate of force production. So when we look at power equals force times velocity, we're going to find that a higher velocity will make up for more than higher force in the same group of individuals. But I think sometimes that message can get garbled because it pushes you towards a particular form of programming which focuses more on rate of force development, and we start to forget that basically, if you increase your force and then for any given percentage of that load where you're able to train faster and you're able to train rate of force development, 80%, 70%, 30% of a higher 100% is always going to be higher. So I think it's important when you start to look at rate of force development to evaluate where is this individual, and indeed, is this the best get? Is this the best opportunity? I think when we talk about rate of force development, a lot of times these messages are inclusive of a very highly trained individual, an elite individual, where yes, it's pretty clear that not only the cost of training for strength is very high. It is clear that objects are being propelled further, individuals are running faster, implements are being swung harder when strength is at a particular high level, but rate of force development is higher. But if your strength is nowhere near what those levels might be, whatever those norms might be that you choose, I think it is important to look at maximal strength, and there might be reasons on how maximal strength, when programmed efficiently with rate of force development, can somewhat mitigate some of the injury risk from being incredibly wound up and incredibly stiff. So there's some things to consider. So the first thing I think we should evaluate is where you're at. Okay. Next thing, when you have a movement that you do believe can carry over to whatever your terminal activity is, well, then we should be looking at the different ranges of percentage to see if there's a gap. For instance, if we look at the same movement at 0 to 20%, 20 to 40%, 40 to 60, and maybe 60 above, is there a significant change in the amount of power that is able to be generated? That's number one. Number two, is it even relevant? So clearly we're going to need to have some load on the bar if you choose Olympic lifts. Clearly we'll probably have a different measure of power if you're sprinting versus sprinting with a sled or a parachute. Okay, so we want to look at all of those different ranges and see if something sticks out. Do I expect that range? So not only are you looking at force, you're looking at power to see if there's a gap in the range so that you know where you might be able to get the lowest hanging fruit. But one of the things in terms of evaluation for power that I don't know is talked about as linearly, because it's not part of the physiology of rate of force development, but it's certainly an enormous factor, is joint mobility, where the larger ranges of mobility that can be performed for a given exercise, couple things. It gives you more time to generate any level of force. So you've got more opportunity to used all the different forms of physics in terms of inertia, but also a longer time to generate force at a high speed, so that can generate more power. But also a stiff joint, a joint that isn't as mobile as another, is got to overcome some internal stiffness. So for instance, if I want to be able to press 100 pounds over my head, do I also have to press through stiffness through my shoulder complex, which could be a factor of mobility or stability? So looking at a generalization of how smoothly someone can move through that pattern is something that's very ideal. Smoothly has no definition. I think you can put a definition from some different forms of movement screens, but that is probably where some of the answers in the loss of power of the aging population. We get real excited by saying that the first quality that gets lost in the aging population is power. Okay, but remember, power is a multiple, is a strength, is rate of force development, and in that population, it might also be a loss of mobility. If you don't have as long a range in which of the joint that you can impart any kind of physiological quality, the number will go down, and in that case is power. Training for rate of force development in that population, just because it seems as one of the best gets for power, may not always be the right choice. So always evaluating movement and output is going to get the lowest hanging fruit. Now, when we do talk about power, another level of evaluation is there a link between the core transferring to the upper body, core transferring to the lower body? For instance, we could look at always look at the lowest learning curve of choices to measure. Okay, so for instance, if we start sitting in a chair and you get a medicine ball of some standardized load, maybe it's based on the person's weight, or maybe you just give them whatever and you measure it. Okay, so now where the lower body is really out of the equation here. Then we could look at vertical jump, where again you're certainly using your arms, but we're looking to transfer from the legs through the core. And then maybe we can look at a sit-up and throwing overhead, where now shoulder mobility is a significant part, and now we're transferring upper body load through the core. Is there a gap? And I think by and large, in golf, for instance, if we measure the two med ball throws in feet and the vertical jump in inches, that would give us, as long as the numbers are relatively the same, that would give us an idea that there's no gap in how this individual transfers power. If someone, take me for instance, that has a vertical jump of X in inches, seated med ball in feet X, but X minus 10 in the in the sit-up med ball throw, it's not necessarily an abdominal transfer, but it's because my shoulders are so stiff and I don't have the opportunity to freely wheel my arms overhead, but I can wheel through this range. And that's a function of shoulder mobility. So that in itself doesn't tell you what to do, but it tells you where you can continue to look in this chase for power. Okay, so we're going to look at mobility. You're going to look at what range of power. You're going to look at how they transfer through power, and you're certainly going to look at limit strength. Rate of force development may not be the only methodology to train in order to improve power. Now, moving forward, I think if we look at one of the challenges when you look at individuals that have extremely high rate of force development, whether that's from development or whether that's from training, genetics, all of these different factors, they have incredible ability to remain stiff. And training further rate of force development methods will continue to create adaptations of stiffness through the connective tissue, through the muscle, through the tendons. Now, there's something else that's very unique about them. Because they're super fast and super wound up, they really are not typically not developed to lift heavy things. lifting heavy things usually is very, very slow. It's not what they're good at. It's not what they enjoy doing. And perhaps they've been coached that that's not the answer. Except if there's a significant gap in strength, slow strength, the 100% strength, which we know can push rate of force development anyway, then this is part of the answer as to why these jumping beans, these incredibly bullet-like sprinters, will have some of these muscle injuries. It's a matter of physics that I went back and watched Keith Barr's talk and other talks that are easily accessed. There's quite a bit of information to suggest that if you train really, really fast for rate of force development, there's a certain group of adaptations that will be abound, but there's a cost that as you continually create force, you may be at a susceptibility to muscle injuries. Then, if you train really, really slow and super enormous amounts of strength, which is always going to be dependent for different people, then you might minimize some of that stiffness, maybe even be a little bit slower, but you might be bulletproofing some of those muscle injuries. It's a dance. Now, initially, one of the things that could be surmised is, well, how do you know? Well, part of how you know is tracking your injuries, being very, very keen and honest with your sports science and your monitoring to find out when that individual was injured, what kind of training was there, and now you have the threshold where if it happens twice over a career, well, then you have a good idea of where they should be before you pull them back from some of that highly explosive training. So one of the options, now again, coming from my point of view, we can use basketball as the example, whereas guys are playing basketball all year. Many situations, not all, don't enjoy training, don't enjoy lifting. I've talked about before where a lot of the success of front squats with one wheel with certain players and creating a significant opportunity to minimize lower body injuries. Now, well, what if we go through all of the speed training, which is basically practice, basically the way the game is played, and then run your strength training? Years ago, I don't remember exactly where we were in Chicago, but Mike Schweigert, who was the strength coach for Northwestern basketball at the time, was really looking at training after practice. Now, I think at that time, and it's a very traditional, very normal thing in college basketball to just be burying these guys during practice. And if you take this highly fatigued, acidotic environment into the weight room, my assertion at that time and now as well is that we do know that under acidotic conditions, force development is significantly impaired. It's why you can't lift as much when you get close to failure. Now, so is it a good idea to be going into the weight room afterwards? Well, at that time, I didn't necessarily know or been exposed to what I can suggest now, but I did say, well, it doesn't mean you don't go in the weight room. It just means you're not going to be getting stronger when you go into the weight room after a significantly fatiguing or potentially acidotic environment. But what you can do is train for other things. And if we train for other things, which is connective tissue strength, using slower lifts, and we did all of this rate of force development stuff in practice, or maybe we do some of the more explosive training before practice, and then a little bit of slow training in the relevant muscles, I think you've got an opportunity to maybe get the best out of both worlds. And there's research that Keith Barr was discussing that gave this a good idea. So I think that's something that should also be included in any discussion of rate of force development, because there is a level of be careful what you wish for. It gives a good example as to why in certain sports the fastest explosive guys always have typically muscle injuries, not necessarily tendon ones. The tendon injuries would probably come from somebody who's got really limited joint mobility and probably lower levels of fitness. So this is it's a lot of things to think about in terms of where we can evaluate to find the lowest hanging fruit, but then how do you maybe put it together when perhaps there could be some costs. Remember, all training has a cost and nothing is free. So I think that's another very, very important component that training, or at least thinking about rate of force development, brings to the table. So hopefully that all makes sense. We'll do some more of those Instagram stories and see if we can generate some more ideas, and I'll just see what comes out of my head. Hope that makes sense. And if anybody's seen a leprechaun, say, yeah,